Order. I will call Alistair Strathern to move the motion, and I will then call the Minister to respond. I remind other members that they may only make a speech with prior permission from the member in charge of the debate and the Minister. There will not be an opportunity for the member in charge to wind up, as it is the convention for 30-minute debates. Order, order. Alistair Strathern to move the motion.
Thank you, Ms Butler. It's an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairship, and obviously a real pleasure to have Minister Norris here to respond as well. I'm very proud to be part of a Labour Party that's taking the housing crisis affecting far too many families across the country deeply seriously. For a very long time, we haven't been building enough homes in this country, and it's families in my constituency and far too many like it right across the UK that have been paying the price. We recognise, I think, as a party in the best traditions of this country, that homes provide more than just a building. They're about security, stability and a platform for prosperity for each and every one of the people we're lucky enough to represent. But today I'm here to speak about a growing issue that's threatening to undercut that very principle for far too many homeowners in Hitchin, in the towns and villages I represent, and in far too many communities right across the country. That is the growing scandal of freehold and the challenges with unadopted estates and the issues that the families left in those estates then have to face. No, absolutely.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. In my constituency of South Derbyshire, we have arguably the largest number of new builds in the country, vying with Warwickshire for the crown of new build county. I have been inundated with requests for help with freehold management companies. My constituents are telling me the same stories they're telling you. And I assume everybody else has probably come to speak today, about the lack of transparency, poor communication, soaring bills and contracts they can't get out of. To date, we've contacted Centric, Greenbelt, Ground Solutions, Meadfleet, Premier Estates, First Port, Trust Green, Virtue Property, Ward Surveyors and Hardwick Construction. So does my honourable friend agree with me that it is fine time we saw an end to this leasehold stealth tax that effectively forces homeowners to write a blank cheque to management companies for years to come?
I thank my honourable friend, and I know she'll be a real powerful champion for those many residents in her community that are falling at the hard edge of this challenge too. But sadly, she's far from alone. There are far too many MPs right across the country who have been speaking to me about the issues their constituents have been facing too. Indeed, when we signed on to a letter to try and challenge some developers about the growing prevalence of leasehold practices, over 50 colleagues signed up in the first week, and I've had many more get in touch since to contribute to some of our work on this. The CMA identified that up to 80% of new homes are now going unadopted as a result of this practice, and it's now becoming far too often the default model for new estate delivery across the country. Absolutely.
Can I commend the Honourable Gentleman? He's absolutely right. It's not just, unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever way you want to look at it, an issue in his own constituency. It's across the whole of the United Kingdom. It is in Northern Ireland, and I thank him for giving way. Local councils will not go into a non-adopted housing estate for curbside collection for bins in Northern Ireland. Instead, residents must bring their bins to the entrance of their estate. That's because the estate roads are unadopted. Does the honourable member agree that there must be more done to support possible elderly or disabled residents in new housing areas to ensure they are able to avail of those council facilities that they pay the rates for, but just happen to be on estates that are unadopted?
I thank him for that intervention, and I know again he'll be a powerful champion for his residents at the hard edge of the challenges on unadopted estates in his constituency. But the example he highlights there I think is quite a powerful one, because it's testament to the fact that more and more families, more and more people who are now living on these unadopted estates just simply aren't getting the services the rest of us living in historically adopted estates would take for granted from our local authorities. And that, Ms Butler, is at the heart of some of the inequity that this growing leasehold challenge is creating, that leasehold stealth tax. Right across the country, more and more families are on the hook to private management companies paying fees of typically £350 or more a year for services that every other homeowner, every other family would have paid for through their council tax. Absolutely.
Thank you for giving way. I'd also like to commend him for how he's really shown leadership on this issue, supporting not only his own constituents but my constituents in Stockton North as well. This issue of high service charges I've seen in my own constituency in the estate Willowsage Court and also at Wynyard. And unadopted roads at Queensgate Estate, which were left for 4 years before my own intervention. Would you agree with me that homeowners deserve, when they buy a new property, to have an agreement with the developer on when these roads will be made up and when they will be adopted, with a reasonable expectation?
Absolutely. I think that certainty and fairness that my honourable friend calls for is the bare minimum that we should be asking for our constituents, and the bare minimum that families should expect when moving into a new property, often that they've been saving up a very, very long time to be able to make that big, exciting step for. I know that his constituents will be all the better for some of the work he's been doing to champion that, but it shouldn't be falling to him and other honourable members to have to fight for this. It should be the matter of course for new developments going forwards. Because that inequity, Mr Butler, that I was talking about is a real challenge. Not only is it unfair that lots of our constituents are having to pay hundreds of pounds and often much more than that each year for services that others are receiving as standard, but the very nature of freehold is also designed to structurally inflate some of these costs too. These management companies are very rarely accountable to the actual residents of news estates that they in theory provide services for. As a result of that, there's no incentive for them to keep costs low. I've had examples of constituents who've had to pay over £250 each per household just to have a single light bulb on the estate fixed. Constituents on the hook for thousands of pounds individually across the state as a result of road challenges, and many more examples where there is just no real pressure or accountability about the costs that residents are having to pay. Alongside that, the complicated legal nature of these structures, the professional fees involved, and the fact that sometimes estates can be subdivided into tiny blocks of pockets and pockets of 5 homes, each of which has to have their own management company, and therefore each of which has to pay for all of these professional services over and over and over again, means that actually a high chunk of these fees often aren't going for any service at all. They're simply covering professional fees, auditing costs, and wider costs associated with a structure that is by its very essence deeply inefficient and just not set up to provide a service to the residents who rely on it. Absolutely.
Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way? Can I congratulate him for securing this debate and also the powerful speech he's making about the iniquity of the current situation that we find ourselves in. I know from talking to residents in Ebbsfleet Garden City in my constituency that there's a real growing frustration that they're paying council tax, but they're also paying service charges to management companies with very little clarity, as he's saying in his speech, for what are often very high fees. Would he agree with me that we need much clearer guidelines on the timescales for which roads will be adopted and the standards for roads and communal areas to be adopted by local authorities so that residents in places like Ebbsfleet and in other communities that have been mentioned in this debate can have some certainty about what they're going to be paying for to whom going forward?
Absolutely. I know my honourable friend is a tireless champion for constituents in Dartford and across his constituency who are impacted by this, but he's spot on. This freehold stealth tax, because it is a stealth tax that our constituents are in essence being asked to pay, isn't just unfair to residents. It also means that all too often they're ultimately reliant on management companies for providing a service that they rarely receive. So not only are they having to pay more than those in adopted estates, but they're often getting a worse service as a result too, because there just isn't the transparency or accountability around the management companies who are taking on these practices. But it isn't just a cost issue for my constituents or many like them. There are big other costs associated in a non-financial way with freehold too. Far too many of my estates have had to band together and sink countless hours of their time just to hold their management companies to account, to get transparency over works that are being done, to make sure that the very basic works and maintenance are being carried out, to ensure things we'd all take for granted, like safety inspections on a play park, are actually taking place. My constituency have had to sink days and days of their time to fight for the very bare minimum. Alongside this kind of very fragmented legal nature of these entities can often put my constituents at risk at crucial moments too. I spoke to constituents whose house sales have nearly fallen through, and one case actually did, because the management company in question failed to provide the management pack in a timely fashion, meaning that through conveyancing they were unable to complete a house sale and move on to that dream property that they'd been looking forward to and that their jobs required them to be moving to. Alongside that, I spoke to another constituent whose credit score was decimated when, after missing a payment by a matter of just a couple of weeks, their management company enacted some of the powers they were able to, as part of the contract, to go straight to their mortgage company, add the balance to the mortgage and extract the fee that way, with all of the impact you'd expect that to then have on the homeowner's credit score and their sense of security. Now, absolutely.
I thank the honourable member and well done in securing this debate here today. We have a situation in my own constituency in Greensport on a road called The Point. And there's no management company for that actual road. It's actually owned by the residents along this road, which has been like a dirt track for decades. And we have a situation where we can't get DFI, which is the road service, to adopt this because they have to pay hundreds of £1,000s, all these residents, to get this road for them to adopt. Is there not a case where there needs to be some sort of special dispensation for people who are caught in those type of traps to enable government to actually adopt roads where they're in this situation for decades?
Absolutely. You know, he cites an example that I think will be very familiar to all too many of us, which is essentially an unadopted patch in our constituencies, be that a road, be that common ground in an estate, falling into this limbo period where no one really is able to step up and take accountability for it. And without action, without some kind of central movement to compulse some change going forwards, more and more of the public ground is going to fall into exactly the kind of disrepair with all of the disillusionment that comes with that the Honourable Member cited there. So I think the case, Ms Butler, for change is very clear. We currently have a system that isn't doing right by our homeowners on new estates. All too often is falling far short to the very ideals of security and prosperity that home ownership and new house building is meant to be delivering, but without action is increasingly becoming the norm. As I said, over 80% of estates, the CMA estimates, have been built in recent years are now subject to freehold, and that figure certainly rings true in my patch, and I know the patch of many other honourable members as well. So if we don't act, if we don't make some changes going forwards, we have a very real risk that a big chunk of our 1.5 million homes we're so committed to building over this Parliament will end up falling into the freehold stealth tax trap too. So what can we do? I think there are a number of actions which I'd like to urge the Minister to make sure this government is continuing to push forward on. It's very clear to me that we need to stop the existence of freehold estates at source. The CMA has powerful recommendations about how to do this, bringing forward minimum adoptable standards and mandatory adoption timeframes that should, for new developments going forward, if enactioned, ensure that we aren't creating more of this problem as we go about tackling the housing crisis that so urgently needs action. I know the Housing Minister is committed to taking forward consultation on this, and I would urge him to move at real pace. We owe it to our constituents to listen to the issues they're facing and to ensure that fewer in the future have to suffer these same challenges. And the CMA's recommendations and speedy legislation to bring them into effect will be a powerful tool to do this. But we can't just act on behalf of new estates too. We'll all have constituents in existing freehold estates who will be very concerned that without action, not only will they continue to face the very challenges we've been talking about today, but they'll also become, in effect, second-class homeowners. As unadopted estates becomes the thing of the past, those on legacy unadopted estates risk being at a very real disadvantage as that problem becomes more isolated and more siloed. In the short term, there are definitely things the government can do to hold management companies better to account. I know there's potential to bring forward secondary legislation that would ensure we're better able to regulate the services they provide, putting our householders and our constituents back in the driving seat and much more able to hold them to account about robust, transparent and timely service, driving down on some of the rip-off fees they've seen and ensuring they're able to access information in a timely and transparent fashion. But we know for lots of those estates that won't be enough. In my 10-minute rule bill brought forward a couple of months back, I advanced the idea of a resident's right to manage. This would enable residents on existing freehold estates to take back control, to step into the driving seat, to push out the management companies who've been ripping them off for far too long, and to be back in a position where they are the controller of their estate's future and they are able to commission the services they would like to see. Whilst not quite the council adoption I know many would long for in the longer term, that powerful move would, I think, put residents back at the heart of what they should be all along, in control of their estate and in control of all of the public realm they rely on to go about their day-to-day lives. Going forwards too, though, I'd urge the Minister to work with the LGA and local authorities right across the country to consider what further measures can be taken to ensure that, over time, we put an end to every single unadopted estate right across the country that we're all currently having to advocate on behalf of because as a result of this deeply inequitous situation. Far too many households we stuck in this freehold limbo trap, and while better regulation and the right to manage would be powerful steps forward and welcomed, I know, by many, ultimately, local authority adoption for far too many of these estates is going to be the only answer that completely resolves all of the challenges we've been talking to today. So while I would absolutely urge the ministers to move at speed in bringing forward the legislation needed to make sure we're cutting off the creation of new unadopted estates, and while I would absolutely welcome action by this government to better hold management companies to account with better regulation of service charges and tighter requirements about the transparency managing agents have to operate under, under, and I would absolutely welcome action on the right to manage to make sure that on these existing unadopted estates, our residents, our constituents are back in the driving seat that they so desperately deserve to be. I know that we're going to need to continue the conversation to work towards a longer-term vision, working with local authorities, with ministers and with our constituents to make sure that we can finally have a pathway to adoption for existing unadopted estates that for far too long, as many other honourable members have set out, have been neglected. This government is absolutely right to focus on the housing crisis as one of the biggest challenges facing this country. And I'm very excited that it's got such a big, bold vision for taking it on. Not just building 1.5 billion homes, but making sure that we've got record investment in social and affordable housing as part of that, and much tighter regulations on lots of key issues from solar panels to building regs too. But if we don't tackle this challenge of leasehold, if we don't end the growing scandal of unadopted estates, we're still going to be setting far too many of our constituents up for a life of misery, a life of battling to get the bare minimum, a life of paying hundreds of pounds or more every year that other residents simply don't have to because they happen to fall on one of these unadopted estates. That can't be right. It's not a situation I'll tolerate for my constituents. It's not a situation I know many other honourable members will tolerate either. And I look forward to working with the Minister and this government to make sure we tackle it with the seriousness it deserves.
The question is that this House has considered unadopted estates and roads. Minister.
Thank you, Ms Butler, and it's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. And I congratulate the honourable member for hitching on securing this important debate today. I think it was characteristic for him and the type of issues that he champions. I mean, I don't think this issue gets nearly enough coverage, frankly, and I think it's great we've got the opportunity to debate it this morning. But it's one of those issues that, exactly as he says, turns dreams into nightmares and can really ruin people's lives or make people's lives just that bit harder in ways that, you know, exactly as he talks about. So it's exactly the sort of issue I know that he's passionate about, but he always uses his platform to raise, and I'm very grateful that he has, and for colleagues' contribution, but also not just for his excellent diagnosis of the problem, but for his very charitably offered solutions to the government on what we might do about it as well. I'm also grateful to him for raising these issues in his 10-minute rule bill through the private members' bill process. That's a very good way for members of Parliament to raise that issues with government and to get us to bring forward with our policy ideas. And I want to be very clear that we support the underlying goals of that private members' bill. It aligns very nicely with our manifesto commitment to end the injustice of leasehold estates. But it is clear, and I think it's important to recognise in opening, that this is an issue, yes, for his constituents, but actually that we're feeling across the country. From Ebbsfleet up to Stockton, South Derbyshire, in the middle, so good that it's nearly Nottingham in South Derbyshire's case. But that is something that residents are dealing with, and it is growing, and those challenges are growing, and we really must be there to help support them. You know, as Building Safety Minister, Ms Butler, I often say that we are, in our part of government and in government more generally, trying to serve twin moral imperatives. Firstly, of making sure people have a home. You know, I think every day about 6,000 children in bed and breakfast accommodation last night, 180,000 children in temporary accommodation. We have to make sure people have homes. But we also have to ensure that those are good homes, that we aren't, exactly as my honourable friend says, setting people up to fail, to make sure that those are homes that are warm homes, make sure that those are dry homes, make sure those are homes that are safe from fire, and in this case, make sure that they don't come with overheads or lower quality infrastructure supplies that make then that matter of home ownership or living in that home as a renter an absolute nightmare and a battle. You know, those are the goals we're trying to serve as a government. They're perfectly compatible together and ones that we have to do. And this is, exactly as the Honourable Gentleman says, this is an issue that has impact on supply as well as local authority budgets. So it's right that we take our time to assemble the best available evidence to make sure we get the right possible change. But we do appreciate, exactly as the Honourable Gentleman says, that we do need to get on at pace. I'm going to start close to where the Honourable Gentleman finished with regards to the Competitions and Markets Authority study that is published into House Building last year. And that confirmed, that helps form the evidence base for what I suspect we've known in our constituency mailbags, but that over the past few years we've seen a significant growth in the number of unadopted estates. And they talked about some of the causes behind the trend, but particularly concluded that this practice is of detriment to consumers. And this government agrees with the CMA's conclusion Overall, the house building market is not delivering for consumers and has consistently failed to do so over successive decades. And we've looked very closely at the recommendations made in the report. It called for measures to strengthen protection for existing homeowners, as well as for government to mandate adoption of all new estates and to implement common adoptable standards for infrastructure on these new estates. And we responded in last October and accepted many of the recommendations, but we do believe there is further work required in some areas. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But I do hold at the heart what the Honourable Gentleman said, what the Honourable Member for Dartford said as well, about that importance of certainty and fairness. That those two things are absent from this, and without that, people can't build their lives properly. And it starts, you know, I wouldn't be a surprise, Ms. Butler, for you to hear me say this, as it so often does. It starts with individual rights, the residents' rights on unadopted housing estates. Because, as we've heard, residents living on privately managed estates with unadopted amenities are struggling with a range of problems. These include, as we've heard, poor service and excessive bills, limited to no transparency in respect of how the money that they do spend where it actually goes, onerous restrictions placed on the title deeds of their properties, and the Honourable Gentleman raises a particularly egregious case, it seems, in that regard, and a general lack of control over how the estate itself is managed. And this speaks to the member for South Derbyshire's point, that the CMA found that approximately 20% of freeholder estates have what's known as an embedded management company set in the title deeds. And they found that under those arrangements, residents may find it extremely hard, or indeed sometimes impossible, to remove or change them, no matter what quality of service they receive, which of course can't be right. And again, the Honourable Member for Hitchin talks about a lack of accountability. Well, what could be a greater lack of accountability than that? So in the immediate term, you know, in the spirit of the urgency that the Honourable Gentleman talks about, we need to introduce protections for residential freeholders on already constructed freehold estates. And as honourable members may well be aware, the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act of 2024, late in the previous Parliament, creates a regulatory framework that will provide for such protections. And I think in line with exactly the sorts of protections and rights that the Honourable Gentleman talked about in his contribution. And that includes providing for standardised demands and an annual report, giving homeowners the right to challenge the reasonableness of charges levied, requiring estate managers to consult homeowners where the anticipated cost exceeds an appropriate amount, and giving residential freeholders the right to apply to a tribunal to appoint a manager in the event of serious management failure. You know, so that is there, a prize in front of us. And as the Housing Minister made clear in his written ministerial statement last November, we know we need to act as quickly as is feasible to implement the provisions. They need to be enacted with detailed secondary legislation. We want to get this right, not least because they are at their heart extremely technical matters. And the last thing we'd want to do is to give hope by promising change, and that change would not then deliver because it wasn't operable or effective. We will bring these measures into effect as soon as possible, but we need to consult first on the technical detail, and we will be publishing the consultation document later this year. The Honourable Gentleman talks about real pace, and I and my Honourable friend, the Housing Minister, have heard that very strongly. And the government, more broadly than this, you know, at the heart of this, having the choice of a managing agent is a really important part, whether that's for an adopted estates, whether that's for buildings where lots of people live together. We know sometimes that the residents can step up, you know, who knows their community better than those. Those are hard jobs, though. I always think, having met many RMCs in the course of my work, and it's an awful lot for them to step up to do. It shows, I think, sometimes some of the frustrations. But we agreed with what the CMA said there, that they need to have the right guidance and support to be able to effectively do the job themselves, where they choose to do so. But we also know that for very many, whether it's buildings or estates, there is going to be a really important role for managing agents. And you know, when managing agents, when done well, are an important part of enhancing communities and enhancing individual lives. Where that isn't the case, and too often we see that not the case, then that can have all the detrimental impacts that we've heard, which is why we're so committed as a government to strengthening the regulation of managing agents of leasehold properties and estate managers of freehold estates. And we believe at a minimum this should be mandatory professional qualifications for managing agents, whether they manage a building or an estate. And we will, again, we'll be consulting on this measure later this year, but I think it's a really important part of driving up standards in the industry to make sure that all managing agents are playing the positive contribution that we know they want to or they should be doing and that they can do when done well. So to talk a little bit, because this again is the point on adoption is often a point around quality of infrastructure, around a local authority and local authorities who have significant challenges, and I don't think anybody expects that new build should be adding more burden on, certainly not through the poor provision of housing or the infrastructure that supports it. And we know that traditionally, certainly without the challenges we seem to see today, local authorities and water companies would adopt those respective parts of a new residential estate, whether it be the roads, the drains, the sewers, and they would set clear standards and provide oversight to ensure that these were delivered to adoptable standards. But we know that when that's not been the case, the responsibility of that ongoing maintenance falls upon those residents. And for some, who are on the journey of adoption, which in many cases can take more than a decade because of those ongoing concerns, they pick up the bill with no kind of resolution in sight and live in that twilight zone, as we've heard. So we are very, very conscious that at the heart of this, developers have got to build to good standards, because otherwise that's poor infrastructure and a lack of adoptability, never mind lack of redress for homeowners, lack of oversight too. And there are too many examples where these have been left unfinished for years and years, and we don't think that homeowners should be left in that limbo, as I say. And this is particularly a challenge. Again, the Honourable Gentleman talks about complexity. Again, we will have more complex schemes of different ownerships, different tenures, different types. We want that as government, but that adds a degree of complexity. But similarly, there are greater expectations for very good reasons on developers, whether that is sustainable drainage systems, biodiversity net gain, EV charging points, playgrounds, sports pitches. All of those make these more challenging, which is why I think that clarity that we intend to set from the centre about standards, I think, is so important. So just coming to my conclusion, Ms Butler, I think the Honourable Gentleman has made a very powerful case. I think it's reflected strongly in the contributions of colleagues, but also in the mailbags for all honourable and right honourable members. And I'm grateful that he's given them that hearing. It is vitally important that we take on this issue in the round to make sure that we get it right and get that change in a way that delivers for people. That's why we're going to be seeking views from a wide range of parties, whether it's local authorities, management companies, developers, but crucially those freeholders, those residents themselves. And I hope that colleagues will help bring their constituents' voice into the consultations. We want to be very, very clear, Ms Butler, we intend to act. There is a clear commitment to act. We have a legislative framework in order to do so. So we are going to see this action in this area. We want to move at the best pace we can. And we know at the heart of it is a really significant prize, and that's improving the lives of very many people across the country, and we're very much committed to do so. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered unadopted estates and roads. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 2:30 p.m. Thank you.